We can also use generics with classes. So let me scroll down a little bit, and let's say I'm going to create a class, and I'm going to call it planet, for example. So I'm going to say planet, and we're going to take some type. And to do this, again, we put the less than sign, and then we put the type in here. For example, T. Well, I've already used T, and I told you guys that you can use any letter here, and it really doesn't have to be a capital letter. You can put A here. That still works. But you usually see like a capital letter. And if you're going to use two of them, like you're going to have one type and then another type and then another one, it makes sense to use the next letter in the alphabet. So for example, when I used T up here earlier, it would make more sense for me to use U here because the next letter after T is U. And usually why you see T is because T stands for type. But really you can put any letter that you want. Just to illustrate this, I'm just gonna change this to let's say for example Z, and it doesn't really matter because you just need to have some letter in here that represent the type that you're going to be working with inside of the class. So now I can start working on the class, and I'm really just doing this on the fly just so I can give you an example. So let's say we always want to know the location of the closest star. So we're going to say closest star, right? So that's going to be the star that is the closest to the planet, and then we can just say this is going to be of type Z. So whatever the type is that we pass in here for the closest star, we're just gonna say that's gonna be the type for that star. So that can be a string, a boolean, a number, an object, an array, can be anything. We just know that whatever the type is, you can just give it to the class, and that's gonna be the type of the closest star. So now it's complaining because we don't have a constructor, so I can have a constructor, and let's take the closest star. So we're gonna say closest star. I'm just gonna copy this and just paste it in there. And again, we're going to say, well, what type is it? We don't know. Whatever the type that is passed to the class, that's the Z type, because that's the only type that we know. And then inside of the body, we can do what we usually do. We just do this, that closest star equal the closest star that we get in the actual constructor. So I'm going to copy this and just paste it here. So now if I want to define a new planet, for example, I can come down and I can say constant, and I can say Earth, for example, and set this equal to a new planet. So I'm going to say new planet, and that's going to be of the type string. That's going to be the type of the sun. So now since we specified that the type is going to be a string, we just have to pass a string. So let's say sun, for example. So you can see how flexible this is. And I can do, let's say, I don't know, some other planets outside of the solar system. So I'm just going to say, I don't know, planet X, for example, and let's say that the type of their sun is going to be some object. We can do that as well, and we're going to say this object is going to have like a name property, which is going to be a string, and it's going to have, let's say, a distance, for example, and that's going to be a number. And let me move this over a little bit. So now all we have to do is to provide this object into this constructor, because you can see that this is what it's expecting here. And to save time, I can just copy this object again, and let me just close this for now so we can see what we're doing, and then paste it here. Now I have to give the actual values. So here I'm gonna say the name of the sun is Zorux, for example. I'm just making this up. And the distance is, let's say, I don't know, 10. And I'm just making this up just so you can see that you can use this with classes as well. Now you can see this is a little bit verbose. And what you would usually see using generics like this, you would see that they use some interface. So they would pass in some interface here or some type using the type keyword. So they would define a type like this and then pass it in here instead of manually describing the object like this. And we can also use them with interface. So I'm going to do interface. And let's say this interface is user data, for example, and we're gonna say it's gonna take some type. So we're gonna say, let's use U this time, and then open and close curly braces. And let's say for the user data interface, it's gonna have a size, for example, and let's say that's gonna be some number. And we also say it's gonna have the actual data, for example. And we can say that this data is gonna be like an array of some type T. Well, not T because we're using U, so that's U. So this data is gonna be of type, whatever type that we tell it that it should be. The same way what we're doing here when we call the new planet, when we call the constructor, because when we do this, then we say, hey, the star, so this closest star is going to be of type string. So we're passing a string here. If we pass anything else here, of course, it's going to yell at us. And we did the same with planet X. So when we call the constructor again, we pass in a type, which is an object, and then this object has a name property and a distance property, and that's what we're giving it here to the constructor, as you can see here. And like I said, you would see a type used like this. So let me just remove this so that I can give you the example better. So let's say this is going to be like a string, for example. So a string array for the data. Well, that's not really going to make sense, but I just want to show you that this is the typical way that you would see this. So here, instead of passing this object here, you would say something like user data. So you pass in the type here. And then now you have to pass in a size, which is going to be a number. I'm just going to put it here. And then a data, which is going to be an array of strings. So we're going to say the data, and let's see if we can encapsulate this. We're going to pass in an array of string, and we can pass in another string. Let's say this is a, I don't know, a system with 2 stars. And let's say the other star is like Zorax, like a female one, just making this up. And now we have to change this to, let's say, planet Z, for example. So you can see that this works just fine. I just wanted to show you that you can use generic with interface. And that's usually what you would see in everyday life when you're coding with TypeScript. So you would make something a generic, and then you define interfaces. And whenever you're giving it the type, like we're doing here, so we're defining the type. So here and here and here, we pass in the interfaces you can see here. But I also want to give you the interface example for type. So let's paste this down there, and let's just call this customer data. We're gonna give it a type. What can we use this time? Let's use K this time, and it's gonna have a K type for an array for the data, for example. And we didn't have to name this data, we can name this anything. So now I can come down here and say let, for example, new user 1, and then we're gonna give it a type, and let's say we're gonna give it the type of customer data. So we're gonna say customer data. Now we have to pass it the type that's gonna be used for the data type, which is the second parameter that you see here. So now what we can do is just open and close curly braces. We're just gonna say it's gonna be string, and it's happy now. We can make this anything, Boolean. So it's gonna be an array of Boolean. It can be an array of number or some type of array, string array or something. So we can do like string, and you can see that works as well. Anything really would just work here because we say it's a generic. It can be used with any type that we pass it. So here for simplicity, I'm just gonna say this is gonna be of type number, and it's happy now. So now what we can do is to call the new user 1, and then we're gonna set it equal to something. So it's gonna be an object because this is an interface. And then here we're just gonna say, well, we need to get a size. So size, you can see it's coming up, and let's say 77. And then we have to give it data. So you can see here, we're defined that the type for this array is gonna be a number. And we could have more properties in here. So we can say something like report. Let's say it's gonna be an object, and it's gonna have, let's say file, for example, and that's gonna be of type K. So I just want to show you that you can have many different properties inside of the interface that can use this same type that you're passing here. So whatever the file is going to be like an object because we're using the curly braces, and it's going to have a property which is going to be file, and it's going to be of type K, which is like a number that we're defining here. So you can see how flexible this is. But just so I can give you this example real quick, I'm just going to comment this out. So now we have to give it some number. So we can say like 5, 2, and then let's say 1, for example. And that works as well. And we can console log all these things. They all gonna show up on the screen. So let's scroll up. Let's copy this console log. Scroll down a little bit too high, and let's paste this. And this time I just wanna log out the new user. So let's just remove this and paste this in here and run it again. Make this a little bigger, and you can see size 77 data, which is the array that we're passing in here. So you see how powerful and flexible this can really is. Really, I always find myself using some kind of generic, and it makes my code very, very elegant. And it really shows that you know exactly what you're doing. And of course, you have to use it whenever there is a need for it. You don't want to just like be using generics randomly. And it's also a fancy word that you might hear in programming languages, but it's really just, you know, a way for creating reusable components or reusable code in your code. So as you can see here, we're using the planet with string, with our own object, with this interface, and we're using this now with number, and we know we can pass any type that we need here. So I hope you guys understand pretty much everything that I just talked about. Again, you can go back and rewatch the videos. But at this point in the course, I feel like you kind of know enough to get into some practice. So we're going to be doing in the next videos is we're going to try to see if we can build an application from start to finish. And this application is going to be a backend application. So I'm going to be using Node.js, and then I'm going to use TypeScript, and I'm going to show you how you can, you know, create an application, organize your files and everything. And we're also going to be getting into database. I'm going to start simple, and then we're going to, you know, make it a little bit more complicated. When you go over all these videos like this, you're pretty much going to forget most of these things that you learn because you don't practice them. So it's really important that you practice what you learn, and that's how you really actually learning the information and really gonna stick in your head. So what I'm gonna be doing in the next module is really just build this Node.js backend application. It's gonna be like an API, and it's gonna be talking to a database. And this is how we're gonna take all this information, all these videos that we just learned, we're gonna put them in practice. And you're gonna see how everything you learn here is gonna come into play when you're building an application. And if you guys need to go back and watch another lecture again, you can go ahead and do that, because, you know, when you learn all these things, it's really high level information. and it's not going to stick once you watch it once or twice. And you also have to practice it, which is why we're going to build an entire application. Another thing I want to mention is I'm also going to be using Docker. So if you guys don't know Docker, don't worry too much. And also if you don't know SQL, don't worry too much. When we're going to build the application, I'm going to go slow and I'm going to, explain everything that I'm doing, explain every single line of code so you guys understand. But it's really important that we, go ahead and build something and put all this into practice. So at this point, you can take a break and you can go grab some coffee or, call it a day and then come tomorrow. Or if it's the weekend, then you can, start again Monday. But I just want to make sure you understand that this is the time for you to take a break if you want to take a break. And also, if you're not very familiar with Node.js backend applications, then you can, watch some tutorial just to get up to speed and then come back to continue the course. But like I said, we're going to be dealing with a lot of information, a lot of different technologies, HTTP, request, response, application, calling all the applications, handling requests, reaching out to a database, writing SQL queries so we can create a database, using Docker so we can containerize our application. So all of this is going to come into play. And unfortunately, I got to tell you this, becoming a developer or a full stack developer or a software engineer, you really need to embrace many different technologies. And that's what I'm going to try to teach you in this course. So don't worry too much if you don't know Docker. Don't worry too much if you don't know SQL. And really the only thing I would say is to be a little bit familiar with Node.js and how a Node.js application is created. Just the basics. You don't need to, know a lot or be an expert on anything, because I'm going to explain everything that I'm doing. So take a break, review some of the lessons that we talked about, and then we're going to come back and put all this in practice, and all this code you can find with the course so you can have everything at your disposal, and then come back to the course all ready so that we can build our first application. We're going to build multiple different applications, but that's going to be the first one. And all these applications that we're going to build, we're going to be using TypeScript, and I'm going to show you how TypeScript is really powerful and apply everything that we learned in this course so far. So take a break, relax, and then come back so that we can start building our application.